Hello humans, it's just Martine, and today we're going to do a very specific video. I'm going to be reading books whose movie adaptations starred Leonardo DiCaprio. My sister and I were just sitting out on the porch, and we were talking about this book that I started like 2 nights ago, listening to it as I fall asleep. That turned into a discussion about Leonardo DiCaprio movies. And we were listing all these Leonardo DiCaprio movies, and then we were like, wait, have we ever actually seen a Leonardo DiCaprio movie? We know all the memes and stuff, but have we actually watched one of his movies? And the answer for her was no, but for me was yes, I've watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but that's it. So we were like, okay, why is he in so many book adaptation movies? This is the perfect 12 TBRs idea. In this, I'm going to be finishing up Catch Me If You Can, which is the book I started the other night, and I'll watch the movie. I'm going to be reading The Wolf of Wall Street, which I seriously have no interest in whatsoever, but I'm going to do it for this. I'm going to be reading The Great Gatsby, which I have read before and did not like, so this reread is a questionable decision. And finally, I'm going to read Shutter Island. I mean, I say finally as if that's the order I'll read them, but it's absolutely not. But I'll read Shutter Island, which I've been meaning to read for a while, and hopefully I'll watch that movie. We'll see what we can do. Okay, so this morning I finished reading Catch Me If You Can. So to complete my review for this, I still have to watch the movie, but my basic thoughts on this: 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I listened to it as an audiobook, and as far as audiobooks go for me, it was a pretty engaging one, which definitely earned it some points. I think the craziest part about this book is the plot. I mean, it's an autobiography, so it's not necessarily a plot, but like, it was the craziest part. The things that happened, craziest part. And looking back, a lot of those things were crazy because they were untrue. Recently, some people have done some investigations on Frank Abagnale Jr. and found that a lot of the things he's been saying for years and years and years about his exploits are not true or not corroborated. He still did bad things, like he was still a criminal man, but a lot of the craziest things were made up, so. Because if you don't know, Catch Me If You Can is the autobiography of this man, Frank Abagnale Jr., and allegedly, from the ages of 16 to 20, he impersonated a bunch of professions, including pilot, true, doctor, untrue, and lawyer, also untrue. And he also went around the world cashing millions of dollars worth of bad checks, true. So just hearing how he did all of that was insane already, and then to be reminded as he went, he would be like, I was about 18 at this point, and I'd be like, oh my god. Absolutely loved it. I love a con man story. The biggest con might be that he didn't do any of these cons. Who knows? He probably wouldn't have gotten away with any of the things he did in modern day with the technology that we have now and the precautions. Granted, some of those precautions that we have now are based on cases and things learned from people like Frank Abagnale Jr. So there's that, but it was fascinating to read. 2 thumbs up. Let's watch this movie. Yesterday, I finally got around to watching the movie version of Catch Me If You Can, and it was so good. So good. So good. That's my whole review for it, sorry. This is why I'm a book reviewer, not a movie reviewer. Alright, so the next book I read is Shutter Island by Dennis Lehane, I think is his name. And I gave this 3.5 stars. I do think this might have been closer to a 4 if I hadn't already known the basic plot or like the biggest plot twist. And I have spent days racking my brain trying to figure out why I watched a video that spoiled this for me a couple months ago, and I've landed on 2 options. One, either YouTube randomly suggested it to me and I just watched it with abandon, or we might have watched something about it in my abnormal psychology class, which would make a little more sense than me just randomly watching the spoilers of a movie I've never seen or a book I've never read on YouTube, but I really can't remember. So that kind of detracted, although it was interesting seeing the setup for that. Like, I think this is the type of book where after you know the big plot point, going back and reading and seeing how it's woven in is interesting too. And so I don't think it like totally demolished my reading experience having known. It was just very bizarre that I was like, oh yeah, I know the point of this book. And I also think, in spite of the huge plot twist, how big of a plot twist makes up for the fact that a lot of the book is like maybe not as interesting as you want it to be. I think there's no plot twist big enough to fully make up for that in rating. Like, it was still a fun time, but like I wasn't hugely invested in the rest of the story along the way. I was just kind of waiting to see how this plot point was going to be introduced instead of being like really engaged in the actual goings on of the story, but I'm interested to see how it comes across in film. I have seen some clips from the movie again, which is one of the reasons I thought of this movie when I thought of book to movie adaptations starring Leonardo DiCaprio. I haven't watched the full film and it's on Netflix, so I need to watch that before it suddenly leaves Netflix. Things jump all over the place in streaming nowadays. So anyway, yeah, Shutter Island, 3.5 stars. It's about this guy who goes to this island. He's a federal marshal, like a US marshal, and he's investigating the disappearance of a patient at the psychiatric hospital on this island. That's all I can tell you. Cool. Movie, good. Not Catch Me If You Can good, but good. The next book I read for this was Wolf of Wall Street by Jordan Belfort, and I gave this 4 stars. Funny story around reading this. So I knew that I wanted to watch this movie when I was visiting Harris, and so on like one of the first days of my trip to visit Harris for spring break, I downloaded the book because it was available at my library, and I was like, great, I just have to read this book before we watch the movie. And there were a couple things that I hadn't realized about the book. Number 1, it's nonfiction. Number 2, it was over 500 pages. So I was like, oh, okay. So I actually spent quite a bit of my reading time over spring break hustling my way through that one. And I did it. And luckily it was very interesting. It wasn't like too big of a chore to read for that long, but this was wild. I think accounts like these and like this story in general, so this even applies for the movie, wouldn't be that interesting if they were not at all based on truth, right? Like if it was purely fictional, I think the movie would be significantly less interesting. I mean, the book would obviously be less interesting, but I also don't know how it would be written if it was fiction, so like I can't say that for sure. But like in general, just rich people doing a lot of drugs, you know, not necessarily entertaining content. Knowing the crazy stuff that happened in this guy's life, different story, right? So there's kind of a theme in some of these. Obviously, some things are probably exaggerated in Wolf of Wall Street. It makes it a more interesting read, but in general, the fact that any of this was based on something true at all is like crazy. So that was pretty interesting to read. I do think the book wasn't a 5-star because 1, there were some moments that were slower or less interesting. 2, there was a jump skip between Jordan Belfort's first day on Wall Street and then like the height of his brokerage firm. And so they like didn't say at all how, or at least not to my recollection, did they really get into the details of like how he got to this point, which I think would have been interesting and more cohesive. A couple things about the movie. 1, the movie is 3 hours long. 2 of those hours didn't feel very long, but then it lost some narrative structure in the end, and so the last like 40 minutes were a little weird, but still overall it didn't feel like a 3-hour movie in general. It was still very interesting and fun. It was also interesting to see the ways they like changed events or squished them together to try and put the most crazy stories together in the least amount of narrative space that they could. Like it could have been way more than 3 hours. I thought Leonardo DiCaprio did like a fantastic job in this movie. It was insane. Obviously really inappropriate movie because Jordan Belfort did lots of ridiculous and inappropriate things. Still fascinating. And I will say, at least for the narrative structure, even though the end was a little weird for the movie, that the beginning narrative structure was better than the book, because whether or not it was true, there was a very clear narrative of how the brokerage firm started. So I did appreciate that. It's fun with both the movie and the book. Is interesting, weird, wacky, if you will, but now it's over. So originally for this video, I was going to reread The Great Gatsby, which I read in 2017 of my own free will and gave 3 stars. I didn't particularly enjoy it, but it wasn't like my least favorite thing ever. But the way that I was going to do it for this video is like, I was going to watch the Leonardo DiCaprio version of the movie and hope that like seeing the movie would paint it in this new light and make the book better. But after watching the movie, I'm not going to reread the book because I also felt the same like 3-star vibes from the movie. The movie did a couple of really weird things, and I think they were in an attempt to make it the most faithful adaptation that they could. But when characters are talking, like when characters start talking about something, to make the choice to then fade out their voices and have Nick Carraway's voice come in and narrate and say something like, "Then Gatsby told me these things," instead of just letting us listen to Gatsby saying those things. Weird, and I didn't like it. Movies and books have different strengths. To draw away and narrate is part of the benefit of a book, and it should not be used like that in a movie, in my opinion. Two, the first, I would say, half of the movie felt like, and this was the way Harris described it, so I'm borrowing this from Harris, felt like a series of music videos. And I agree. And the story, I just don't think is very interesting. I was really annoyed with Gatsby. Yes, forbidden love and stuff can make a great story, but it just felt like he was whining. I get that the point of this rich man wishing he could have this girl back and like trying to get her back, in some ways tries to present the idea that money does not buy happiness, but I was not having it. I will say a weird thing about watching that movie this week is that over spring break, Harris and I planned to watch the 3 original live-action Spider-Man movies because I love Spider-Man, but I haven't seen those 3. And he grew up watching the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies and like loves them to death. So he's like, you have to watch them. And I was like, it will probably be honestly more fun to watch them with you. So we planned to watch them together, and we watched them last week. And we were also trying to watch almost all of the Leo movies for this video because watching movies is not my favorite thing to do, and watching them with Harris is a lot better, especially because he notices a lot of things in movies that I don't, so we can have really great conversations about movies. So we watched the 3 Spider-Man movies, and then Tobey Maguire stars as Nick Carraway in this version of The Great Gatsby, which is a decade old now, by the way, which shook me. It came out in 2013. I was like, a decade? Oh my gosh. It was kind of a Leonardo DiCaprio week, but it was also kind of a Tobey Maguire week. So Great Gatsby, sorry, but I'm not rereading it for this video because I just know I won't love it, and so what's the point? If anything, this movie confirmed my feelings about The Great Gatsby, which, yikes. Like 3 stars, typically not a bad rating. In this case, I don't look back on it very fondly. Because I'm not reading The Great Gatsby, I am officially at the end of this video. And I do have some thoughts about all of this. One, I'm proud to say that I have now seen more Leonardo DiCaprio films than just Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And I also feel like I got different movies from different points in his career, which was interesting to follow along with. I obviously haven't seen every Leonardo DiCaprio film ever made, but maybe one day. I do think the surprise of the century in this one was that I really actually enjoyed both the movie and the book for The Wolf of Wall Street, which at the beginning I said I had no interest in whatsoever. And although I would still say that I didn't like that movie maybe as much as Catch Me If You Can, I would say that I am set up for, in my preferences, loving something like Catch Me If You Can and liking The Wolf of Wall Street a lot less. And so the fact that I really enjoyed Wolf of Wall Street is a surprise, whereas it's not a surprise that I really liked Catch Me If You Can. I also want to say that it is interesting to see the kinds of characters that Leonardo DiCaprio chooses to play. They're all very interesting characters. I'll give him that one. So if you like this video, go ahead and give it a big thumbs up and comment down below. What is your favorite Leonardo DiCaprio film? Is it perhaps the Romeo and Juliet? That I also didn't read Romeo and Juliet for this. Is it one of the movies that I watched for this? Is it something else entirely? Lead me in my next direction in my quest of movie watching. And subscribe for more reading, writing, and college lifestyle content. And until next time, bye humans, bye!